back to my channel Code with Hafiz. This is Hafizullah Masoudi, and this is our 5th video on how to create multi-authentication system in Laravel framework. So guys, in this video we will continue from where we left in our previous video. And the thing that we did in our previous video was to create the create route method and also form for the users. And in this video we will probably write the code for storing that form. So first let's log into our system. So click on login and log in as administrator. The password is password. So in here let's click on this manage users, and if I click on this create user, as you can see we created this form in our last video. So open your project in the text editor, and in here go to this resources, views, user, or not user, admin, manage user, and in this create blade. So in here let's first declare the route for the store. So our double curly brackets, and we want to say route, and this route should be user store. Now let's create this route in our routes file, which is in routes folder web.php, and in here let's duplicate this one. Instead of create we want to say store. Copy, paste, and in here in the URL also instead of create we want to say store. So after creating the route, let's create this method. Let's create this method inside our admin controller. So for that we have to go to app, http controllers, and admin controller, and at the bottom we can say public function and user store method in our curly brackets. Now in our store, the first thing that we want to do is to validate the data, and for that we can say $this arrow validate, and our parentheses, and we want to validate the data that is coming from the form. So to get that data, in here we can say dollar, or before $, we can say request $request. Now we have access to that form data through this request variable. Now inside here, now we can say we want to validate the request that is coming from the form, comma, then our array. Now inside this array we want to validate each of the field that we want. So the first field that should be validated is the name. So name should equal to required pipe, because we want to give another validation also. So the max length should be for name 255, comma, after the name we want to validate the email of user. So email equals to, first of all, required pipe, it should be the type of email, pipe, and it should be also unique. So unique, colon, inside which tables? Inside users tables. Users table. Now after validation, the second part that we want to finish is the password field. So in here let's say first let's check for the password, because we have two kinds of password, so we have to check for them. So for that we can say if parenthesis exclamation mark empty, and inside this we can say request arrow password. So if this statement is true, then we will run some code in here, and else we will do something else if it's not true. So in this statement, what I'm saying is that if this request password field is not empty, so we will then store our password in a variable called password, and then we will trim whatever is coming in this request password field. So for that we can say request arrow password. Terminate it. Now if that field is empty, what we want to do, we want to generate auto password. So first let's declare our variable, which is the same as above, password, and it equals to password. We want to auto generate this password key for every user when a user clicks on auto generate. So that's all guys for the password. Now after password, the third thing that we want to do in here is to finish other lifted fields of the form. So before everything, let's first create our model variable. So for that we can say user equals to new user model, and if we check at the top, we are using this user model, so we have access to this user model. Now in here, let's press enter. User arrow, the first field is name, so this equals to request arrow name. After name, let's duplicate it a few times, and after name, the second thing is email, and in here also email. Well, after email we have password. So for the password in here, what we want is this password variable, whatever it is, if it is auto generated or usually manually typed by the admin. But before storing it as it is, we want to hash it. So in here we can say hash : make. Now inside here our password variable, and don't forget guys that you use your hash at the top. So after these all, we can say use hash. Now after storing the password as hash, the other thing that we want in here is to remove these other fields because we don't have left any fields. So finally now we can say user arrow save, because now we want to save the data to the database, and after saving is successful, we want to return redirect, because after saving we want to go back to a specific page. So for that we can say return redirect arrow route, and the route in here, for now it should be user index. Save it, and now we are good to go and check our code. So if we go back to our browser and refresh, now one thing is left guys. As you can see, we have roles here and we want to attach them to the user, but the code, we didn't write any code for our roles. So let's get back to our code, and after saving but before redirection, we want to say user arrow sync roles, our parentheses, and we want to explode. So guys, in here, why we want the explode method of PHP, let me show you guys what we did in our previous video again. Now for that, click on this create blade, and if we come to the bottom, as you can see, we are sending this hidden field of input, which is roles, all the roles that we are selecting with this input or checkbox, and we are making all of this by view or using view in our project. As you can see, we have bind it to this roles selected object, and in here we have roles selected object as an array, and every index of array is divided by comma. So now in here we want to explode that every index according to this comma, and after comma we want that field's name, which is coming through request arrow roles. Terminate it. Now guys, this was all for our roles. It would automatically select or sync all the selected roles and explode it and store it separately in pivot table of roles and users relationship. So now let's go back to our browser and check the code if it works. So in here I want to save this new user by the name of Hafizullah, and the email should be hafizullah@app.com. We want to auto generate the password and we want him to be administrator. So create user. Now you can see we have an error, and the error is because I know what it is. So let's go back to our code and let me show you. If we come to this routes file, you can see we are sending this route method as get, but if we check our create blade, if I go up, you can see the method for the form is post. So we have to change this get method of route to post. And if you check the browser and read this error message, the post method is not supported for this route. Supported methods get or head. As you can see guys, the message itself is obviously saying what and where is the problem. So now if I refresh, you can see it redirected us back to user admin and created this user by the name of Hafizullah. This is this email, and the date for is creation. So guys, this was how to create users. Now the next thing that is left is, now let's be able to show every user details, from which I mean when we click on this I or info icon, we want to see each one of them separately with their details. So to do that, let's get back to our code, and let me show you first one thing, that let's go to the page in where this info icon is located. So that is located in our index blade of user. If you see at the bottom, this is our info icon. So what we want to do for this link is to declare a route. So in here we can say double curly brackets, and inside it we want the route, and the name that we want to give this route is user show, and we want to show a specific user, so we also want each one of them ID. So for that we can say comma user variable arrow ID. Now we are sending this user ID to this user show route. So let's create route. So I will duplicate it, and instead of store, this time I will say user show. Copy this, paste it for the method name also, and in the URL we want to say show slash our curly brackets ID, because we are sending ID also with this route. So guys, this was how to create this route. Now let's create this user show method inside our admin controller. So at the bottom we can see public function user show, and we have ID coming in the URL also. Now the next thing that we want to do inside this method is to grab the ID from the database, and we want to store it in a variable called user, which is equal to our user model colon where. We can do where clause also, but instead of where, Laravel has something like saying find. You can use find, and in here we can just pass our ID. So it will look for this ID inside the users table of the database, and if it is available, so it will grab it, or not, it will not. Now after this, we want to now load our view and pass the data to that view. So for that we can say return view, and the view that we want, if we go up, yeah, the view should be in admin.manage.user.show, and we want to say compact because we want to pass the data also. So for that we can say compact user. Terminate it. Now that's all for the show method. Now let's create the show blade inside our user folder. So right click, new file, show.blade.php. Now inside this blade, what we want to do is, let's go to this index and Control A, Control C to copy it and paste it inside show, because we will be needing most of the code from that page, so we copied it. Now in here we want to customize this page. Now let's first remove this table because we don't want table in here, so remove it. Now for this link, let's also comment this link in case we need it later. So if I now go to the browser and refresh, and if I click on this show, you can see it's throwing an error. Yeah, because now we want to change. So it says the get method is not supported for this route. So if we go back to our project and routes file, you can see now we have to say the method should be get, because in here we are getting, not posting anything to the database. So change this method to get. And now if we go back to browser and refresh, you can see now it is working just fine. If I go back and click on another user, you can see it also passes the user ID. So it means that we have now access to that user variable and show the user data in this page. So let's do that. Now let's get back to our code, and inside the show blade, inside this card body, we want to declare a row. After row, inside row, now we want to call md6. So for that we can say dot call dash md6. Now inside here we want an h1 or not h1, because we already have is saying manage users. So instead of manage users, we want to say user details. Now inside this call md6, what we want is the user information. So first of all we need a label for name. So the label should say name, and after that we want a pre-tag. Inside pre-tag we want our double curly brackets, and we want to say $user arrow name. Now let's copy this whole call md6 and paste it again, and now we want to say for email, here also email, and in here also email. Now let's see how it looks like. So if I refresh, as you can see, we have access to the user information. So let's also echo other stuff or details about this user. So if we hit back to our code, now after this row, let's declare another row, and inside this row, because we have a relationship between the user and the roles, so we have access to roles also. let me show you how we can access rules from a specific user. Well, this is called Eloquent Relationship in Laravel. So in here, what I want to do is declare a callMD. So dot call dash md dash 6. Now inside here, first of all, I want a label for roles, and it should also say roles colon. Now first of all, let's say for each, because there could be multiple user or roles assigned to a single user. So for that reason, we have to say for each. Add for each and end our for each loop. So end for each. Now for inside this parentheses, we want to say user, because we have access to this user variable. Now after user, what we want is arrow roles, and we want this as $role. Now inside this for each, let's say pre tag and our double curly brackets, and now we have access to the role variable arrow display name, if I'm not wrong. So let's check our browser. You can see it's showing the roles attached to this Hafizullah user, and that is administrator, because we if you remember, when we were creating this user, we only selected administrator for this user. Well guys, I want to show you one thing more in here, and that is imagine that you have a user that you didn't have attached any role to that user. So let's instead of echoing the role, let's put it in a condition, because we want to check if a user don't have any roles attached to them. So we want to say in here that no roles for this user. So if we go back to our code and inside this for each, or outside of the for each, after this label, let's put an if statement, and inside this if we want to count for the array of roles. So how can we do that? We can do that by saying $user arrow roles arrow count, and then our parentheses. If the count is greater than 0, then we want to loop for each one of them and show the role information, and if it's not true, else. What we want to do in here, let's also close our endif or our if statement. So inside here, what we want to do is, let's first declare the count for the roles. So we can say user arrow, or not that, let's say a paragraph tag, and inside here we want to say this user has not been assigned to any roles yet, and that's all we need, guys. So if I check now, because we already have a role assigned to this user, so it won't show. So the next thing that I want to do, guys, is to be able to update the user also. So if we go back, you can see we have an update button for each user. So what we want to do now is to pass the user ID with the edit method, or not method. First we need to declare the route. So we want to pass the ID with edit method, with edit route, and after that we will create the edit route. So if we go back to the code, let's close this show blade because we don't need it anymore, and we need this index. So in here, in this href for the edit, let's first say double curly brackets. Now we want our route, and the route should be user edit, and we also want to pass the ID. So comma $user arrow ID. Now let's create this user edit route in web.php. So what I will do is to duplicate this route, and instead of user show, I want to say user edit. Copy this paste it in here, and instead of show we want to say edit, and the method is get. Yeah, that's fine. So now let's create this user edit method inside our admin controller. So in here let's say public function user edit, and the ID is coming through URL and our curly brackets. Now in here what we want to do is grab the ID from the database and pass it to the edit view. So let's do that. So $user equals to our user model : find and $ID. Terminate it. Now after that we want to say return view, and the view should be located in admin folder, manage folder, user folder by the name of edit, and we want to compact and pass the user information inside this compact method. So let's create this edit blade inside user folder. So right click, new file, edit.blade.php, and what we want in this blade is to copy everything from create blade and paste it inside edit blade. Now save it, and if we check our browser, if I refresh and click on this link, you can see undefined variable roles. And yeah guys, if I show you the code, let's get back to our code, and if we go to this admin controller and see this user create, we are passing the roles to our blade. So in edit we also have to pass the roles to be able to access those roles. So in here let's paste it and also pass all the roles as an array. So save it. Now if we go back and refresh, you can see now we have access to this page. Now the other thing we want is to grab the data and show it in each input, and for the roles we want to by default selected each of the roles that has been assigned to this user. So let's show for this first these two inputs. So if I go to our code and edit blade, and if we go to the top, for the name what we want to do is give it a value, our double curly brackets, and inside here we can see user arrow name. Let's copy this one and paste it for the email also, and instead of name we want to say email. Now if we check our browser, refresh, you can see now it has been shown. So for the password what we want to do is bring some changes, because in here now we won't have to say that if a user or admin do not want to change the password, so that option should be selected, or instead we want to say auto generate new password, or instead of new password auto generation, let's say if a user wants to give this user a manual password. So first let's change this text for this checkbox. So if I go back to the code, and now in here what I want to do is, let's instead of this type of text, or leave it like this, instead of this we want to say radio button, because we want this time a radio button, and its name should be password option underscore option. And for the view model or for the view binding, we want to say if password options, or just password options, because we want to bind this input with this password options object. Now after this one, let's for the text say do not change, and the other field that we want to and here is this input. Let's change this one back to checkbox because we want this one to be checkbox, because a user should be able to select this or manually, if not selected, manually type a password. So I think it was just fine like it was, guys. So guys, the next thing after email is that we want our password field. Now if I check our password field, if I click on this and say we don't want to auto-generate the password, it will manually type password. For the edit now, instead of auto-generate, let's say in here that do not change. So if we go back to our code, instead of this auto-generate password, we want to say do not change. And if I go back, refresh, you can see now it's looking fine, because this is edit, so it has to be like this. And if a user want to change, so he must uncheck this checkbox and type the password manually. So guys, I think now it's good. Now the other thing that I want to show in here is these roles. So for the roles, if we go back to our code and if we come to the bottom, as you can see guys, we already have binded this role input with this roles selected object. And if we look down, we have this roles selected. Now instead of this brackets, what we want is our curly brackets and 4 exclamation marks, and inside them we want to say, because we have access to user variable, so we can say $user arrow, and after that roles. And arrow, what we want to do is say pluck method, and we want to pluck it according to its ID, because if you see, we are storing the value of every role as an ID. So in here we should pluck it as ID or according to this their ID. So save it. Now if we go back to our browser and refresh, you can see now the only roles that were assigned to this user are being selected. So guys, this was everything for our blade. Now after this we want to store the changes to the database. Now the first thing that we need, if we go to the code and go to up, now let's change this route for storing the changes. We want to say this time user update, and we also want to pass the ID with this route, so comma user arrow ID. Now let's create this user update route, so copy this one and let's duplicate this route and paste it for the method name also. And instead of edit, I want to say update, and to not forget, we want the method also to be post, because we are dealing with form. So after creating the route, let's create this user update method inside admin controller. So at the bottom we can say public function user update, and we want our request which is coming from the form. So for that we can say request $request, and comma we have also ID coming through our URL, so our curly brackets also. So guys, what we need in here is everything from our create or restore method. So let's copy everything from the store method and paste it inside update method also. Well, for the validation, let's leave the validation as it is, but for the password, what I want to say, if we go back to our edit blade and the checkbox is named as auto generate, so inside our admin controller, instead of password, I want to say auto underscore generate, and remove this not empty, it's parenthesis also. And if a user says do not change, Well guys, let's also change this auto generate to do not change, because this auto generate doesn't make sense. So let's change this view model to do not change. Copy this, and instead of auto generate we want do not change, and at the bottom for this object we also want to name it do not change. So if I go back and refresh, you can see nothing has changed, or now it's not working, and that is because we also have to change this auto generate to do not change. Now if I refresh, it's working just fine. So let's work on our method. So in here what I want to say is if user has selected do not change, and I can do that by saying equals to true. This means if a user has selected do not change. So inside here what we want to do is do nothing. So for the password we want to say return true, and if a user wants to change the password, then we want to in here say, let's say $request arrow our password field. Let's cut this code from here at the top of or after validation. Let's paste it, and instead of new we want to find the ID, so colon find ID. Now for this return true, let's say the password variable equals to request arrow password, because if a user don't want to change the password, so we will send the old password to this password variable. Now for the name we want the name, for the request email we want the email, and for password we want to make hash of that password. Let's also cut this one from here and put it inside this else, because if a user types the password then we want to make hash, or else that old password is already a hash, so we don't need to make it a hash again. So for that reason, cut that hash code from here and paste it inside this else statement. Now after this, finally we can save our data to the database, and for the roles we also want to sync the roles, so leave other things just like it is. Now guys, this is all the code for update. Now we can check our code if it works. So if I refresh, and instead of name let's say Hafizullah with capital H and Masoudi, and if I click on this, it's not working. So guys, let's go back to our code and check our blade, or not in our blade, let's go to admin controller and let's check from the top. So our validation looks fine, this grabbing the ID also looks fine, and in here, yeah, I think this is the problem. Instead of request, in here we want the old password, so user arrow password, and this password looks fine, these also looks just fine, and the other code is also fine. So because we are already here, let's also change the button text. Instead of saying create user, we want to say save changes. Now let's go to our browser and check if it works. So let's say update it and click on this save changes. It is still not working. Well guys, I think I know what is the problem. If we get back to our code and see in this update method, you can see we are saying in the validation that the email should be unique, but we are not saying not this user, or if I say simply ignore this user but check for the other users. So how can we do that? We can do that in here by saying comma, email, comma. After that we want to concatenate our ID that is coming from the URL. Now I think that's all we need to do for the validation. And now if I go back to browser and refresh, now if I say updated and save changes, now you can see it redirected us and the user is also updated. Now if I update again or edit again, now I want this user to be a director also. Save changes, you can see it redirected us. But if I check the details, you can see now this user has two roles, and one is administrator and second one is director. But guys, this is not looking fine. So what we can do in here is go back to our code, and this show blade, and in here what we can do is let's declare a row. Let's cut this and declare a row, and inside row, or let's remove this row from here. In here I just want to call md3. Now paste the pre-tag, and outside this for each I want a row. This is a closing div. Now if I refresh, yeah, it looks fine. Let's also put a pipe in here. If I refresh, we want this pipe after this column div. It's not looking good, so remove it. I think that's okay. That's okay, guys, no problem. So guys, we have finished our user edit method and update method also. Now the last thing that we have left is the delete functionality. Well guys, I will leave the delete functionality for now, because the next thing I want to make sure is to create the roles CRUD also, and after that the permissions CRUD also. And if we have time left at the end of this tutorial, I will work this delete functionality for you guys. So guys, this was all for this video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you guys in the next video. Bye.